My name is Allie Barber. I grew up in a Christian home, a Christian school, and today I want to talk to you about how important it is to guard your heart and how the goal of the enemy is to keep us from guarding our hearts. There's two verses I want to read to you today. One talks about the heart and one talks about Satan. The first one is in Proverbs 4:22, and it says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for from it flows the well springs of life." And throughout the entire Bible, there are very many verses where the Lord talks about how important it is to protect and guard our hearts. Second passage is in 1 Peter 5, verse 8. It says, "Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour." In verse 9 it says, "Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world." When I was 13 years old, I opened up a door that the enemy used to start hurting my heart. I became very curious about sex, even though my parents had already talked to me about it, and I grew up in a Christian home. I began looking through the TV when my parents weren't there, trying to find anything involved of couples making out, and it just started pulling me in. I eventually went to the computer and started looking up just articles about what couples do on their honeymoons. And basically, I just started feeling so much guilt, knowing that what I was doing was wrong, but not knowing how to stop it. I got to a point where I started looking at pornography and just really felt so dirty. I knew it wasn't what God wanted, but I didn't know how to deal with it, how to stop. And one night my parents came to me in my bedroom and talked to me and said that they had forgiven me, that God had forgiven me for my sin, but that it was something that he wanted to turn around and use for good instead of for bad. And my dad read to me the passage about Joseph and his brothers who had sold him into slavery, where they had intended to harm him, but he told them at the end, after God has redeemed his life and exalted him as king, and he tells his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God used your sin for good." And my father just told me that God was going to do the same with me, and I've seen the fruit of how he has redeemed my past. I carried around this sin, even though I knew God had forgiven me, I still carried around the consequences of my sin, just all the guilt, all the shame for several years. All through high school, I didn't tell a soul. And I remember my dad telling me, "You are going to be able to share your testimony someday with many girls." And I said, "Yeah, right. I don't even want to tell my future husband." And I just carried this sin, secret sin, for a while. After high school and college, I go on a short-term mission trip to Guatemala that my mom really encouraged me to go on, that I did not want to go on, but God really used it to speak to me. One night, we had a really big group of high school students, about 200 kids, and a girl stands up on stage one night saying that God had put it on her heart to share her testimony of how she dealt with pornography. And I was just frozen in my tracks thinking, wow, I'm not the only girl, I'm not alone. And she talked about several lies that the enemy uses to try to trap us in our sin and isolate us from God, even though God has forgiven us and that he's so close to us. After she had finished talking, there was a line of about 50 girls trying to talk to her, all crying, and I was one of them. And I just realized, wow, I really am not alone in this, and that there are several girls that have struggled with the same thing. So today I just love reminding people how God has given us an intimate relationship with him, and he also wants us to have intimate relationships with fellow believers, knowing that there's nothing that can separate us from his love, that we are all just broken, weak sinners that he has redeemed and called us to have a deep relationship with him. Once I went to college, even after God had dealt with the sin and freed me from it, I still struggled just from a lot of spiritual pride. I got into my first relationship at 20 years old, and it was a good relationship, but I knew God was not calling me to marry that guy. And after our breakup, I was so broken emotionally, that I just felt empty, and I was searching for that love that I had with my ex-boyfriend, and it was just a really low point of my life when God had to wake me up from my spiritual pride and show me how much I needed him. The weekend after I broke up with my boyfriend, I ended up going to a bar and drinking and getting drunk and going home with a guy that I did not know and doing things that were not right. And the next morning, it just felt like it was a dream. The girl I knew would never do something like that. And the scary thing is, when this happened, I had a good relationship with God. I wasn't living in a lot of sin, but God had to wake me up using that to show me that I am so broken, that I need him so much, and that once you open a door, as far as drinking, even though I was 22 years old, I opened that door and the enemy ran with it and really hurt my heart. And so in Ephesians it says, do not give any opportunity for the devil to come in. Don't give an opportunity for sin. And God really just started showing me like how the most important thing I could do in my life is to honor God by giving him all of my heart, surrendering all my heart to him, and just living fully for him. I began to understand what it's like to surrender everything, to just give God all of my plans, all of my future, and it was the best decision I've ever made in my life. I would have to say, if you are struggling with a sin like this, or just a sin that is secret that you haven't told anybody about, it is so important for you to talk to somebody about it. It could be a friend, it could be a counselor, a parent, just an older adult. But I did not tell anybody about this for years, and even though I knew God forgave me, I carried it around for so long, and it just ate at me, at my thoughts all the time. And what's crazy is years afterwards, when I talked to one of my good friends about this sin in high school, she told me the same time she was dealing with an eating disorder, and I had no idea. So there's so much proof that all of us go through dark moments like this, and we think that we have to keep quiet about it because our friends won't accept us or they'll judge us. But that is just another lie from the enemy, that he wants us to keep these things in the darkness. But God is calling us to be honest, to have real freedom from these sins. And the only way to have real freedom is bringing them to the light, coming to the Lord, and also coming to share with a friend who can also help us walk through these moments. What I realized after walking through this fight for me with pornography, that the enemy really uses it to change the truth about God and what he created as good. He wants us to depend on something else. The enemy wants us to depend on something else that is not healthy, that is not from the Lord. What the Lord created as good, the enemy has distorted it and changed it into something that is not good. And I just saw in my own heart the hunger that I had for a good relationship with a man, with a boyfriend, the intimacy that I was craving. I realized later that it's something that only God can do for us, something that only he can give us, can fill our hearts with his love, with his intimacy, that is so much better than anything that Satan will try to tempt us with, to try to distract us with. And his ultimate goal is taking our attention off of God, taking our hearts off of God. But once you surrender your entire heart to God, your entire life, you will realize how real he is, that he can really be your best friend, and that he can fill your heart with so much joy, with so much intimacy that you've never experienced with any other person. I just really want you to know today that you are not condemned, that God has completely forgiven you the moment that you repent. God says that he wipes our sin as white as snow, and that it's no longer a part of us. It can be a part of your story of redemption, of how God uses you as a testimony to other people, but you don't have to feel weighed down by it. It's not something that belongs to you. It's just like my dad told me, and how Joseph told his brothers, it's something that the enemy intended to use in your life to harm you, but that God is so able to turn it into good. And I just want to encourage you, if you feel like you are far from God right now, there's nothing stopping you from being close to him. He's waiting on you. He doesn't condemn you. He's not disappointed in you. All he does is forgive you and love you and give you a bright and hopeful future like he's done for me. And something that I love to testify about is just that God is so much bigger than our dreams. I never imagined that I would have the life that I have now after I experienced all this, after I went through this sin. The Lord has been so good to me and called me to a bigger work, actually serving youth overseas. And it's just something that has proven to me that God loves using weak people. He loves having his name be great and his love being shown throughout the world.
This is not what I asked for. This is not what I would have chosen. To be broken